Alright, this part is on page 31 of your book under the heading number 6, differences between a deposit and a penalty. Alright, comparing the differences between the deposit and a penalty. We had already discussed what is a deposit, why we need a deposit, what is a penalty, why we need a penalty in a contract situation, right? How does it help to make a contract stronger, more beneficial, more protective, less risky for you when you have a deposit and penalty as a condition of contracts, as additional conditions into the contract? How does this help your situation? All right, we have already discussed that. All right, now to perhaps clarify or deepen your understanding on this very important part, all right, we need to compare also the differences between deposit and penalty so that you can see clearer and get a better understanding of these both protective concepts that we use in any kind of contracts, any kind of business contracts. All right, so right on page 31 of the book, right, differences between the deposit and the penalty, I list out in 6.1 and 6.2, but I think over there maybe it's a little bit brief, right? It's not that detailed, and I would like to list out the differences here in detail. There are 3 differences. And before I start, I want you to take a moment to think about it. Try not to look at number 6.1 and 6.2 in the book. Think about it, right? Think about it. This is what you learn. Don't just go straight to the book and look at it and say, is this, is that. You're not going to learn anything this way. Think about it first. You have a brain. Think first. What are the differences between a deposit and a penalty? Now that you learn what is and why we need deposit and penalties. Okay. Go to the first difference. A deposit is a proof of a contract. Proof of a contract means the deposit collected. The deposit collected by the person who received the deposit. You pay the deposit to the other person collects the deposit. This deposit that is collected can be used as the evidence, as the latan, as the proof that a contract has been entered into. So say for example, you have a contract that is made verbally, right? I agree to sell you my motorcycle for 200,000 baht. Here is 50,000 baht deposit I pay to you. Right? Nobody would ever know tomorrow. Nobody would know. Tomorrow, next week, nobody would know that I say this to you. I sell you my motorcycle at 50,000 baht. Right? Nobody will ever know. And you say, okay, I buy. Right? Nobody will ever know that this contract took place. Right? It's said. You say today, tomorrow, who is going to remember? There's no record. Right? It's not in writing. So, if there is a certain amount of money, of deposit paid, right, 50,000 baht here in this case, 50,000 baht is the amount of money that is a deposit. This 50,000 baht shows that there is a contract. It proves that there is an offer and acceptance and a contract has been formed, a contract has been born. Because nobody in their right mind would pay a deposit if there isn't a contract, right? So the deposit can be used as a proof, as an evidence to show that a contract has already been formed. Okay, whereas if you compare it with a penalty, a biapra, as we studied before, the penalty compensates, right? At the same time, it punishes the party who breached the contract or did not fulfill a certain condition. The penalty only comes when there is a certain condition that happened. For example, a breach of contract or a non-performance of a certain condition. It is only then that the penalty is paid. Right? So the penalty is not something that is paid at the beginning of the contract, or the penalty is not something that is paid when the contract is entered into or the contract is formed. It's not paid at that point in time. It is only paid when certain condition happens. For example, a breach of contract happens, then the penalty is paid by the person who breached. Right? If there's no breach, there's no penalty to be paid. So it cannot be used as any kind of a proof that a contract is entered into. Alright? The second difference is this one here. Delivery.ส่งมอบ Deposit is paid when the contract is entered into. Paid means that the deposit must go, right? Must be given, must be placed. Given is not the right word to use because maybe you can take it back if you perform. The deposit is something. It can be money. It can be a movable thing. Many people like to think deposit can only be money. It doesn't always have to be money. I know in everyday life you see a deposit as money being placed. Wang macam pengen, wang macam pengen. It doesn't always have to be ngan. The deposit can be a movable thing as well. Right? It can be a chair, a table, a car, a computer. Right? Some jewelry, some gold bar, some necklace be placed as a deposit as well. Any kind of movable thing. Of course, it cannot be an immovable thing like a piece of land or a house because the deposit must be delivered. Right? Must be placed to another party. So, the deposit is delivered upon entering into a contract, as I just explained when we talked about this. Right? The deposit doesn't come at a later point in time. After the contract has been entered into, the deposit is paid. No. The deposit is paid on the same day when the contract is formed or on the same day when the contract is entered into. Right? And it has to be a movable thing, of course, because it has to be placed to another party. Comparing with a biapra, a penalty, right? As we talked about when we talked about proof, right? The penalty is paid only upon a certain condition in the contract. C here refers to contract, okay? This refers to contract. C means contract. I got no place to write, so I just write C. Paid upon a condition in the contract. For example, the condition could be a breach of contract. The party who breached the contract pays the penalty. If nobody breached, there's no penalty to be paid. So it is something to be paid. It can be tangible. It can also be intangible. This is again a difference. Okay, a penalty can be any kind of thing. It can be immovable even. Right? Yes, the land and the house can be the penalty. It can be sold. It can be transferred. Right? It can be sold and the money paid as penalty. Right? Or it can be transferred to the other party who did not breach. Alright? Or any kind of property, tangible, intangible, right? Corporeal, incorporeal, right? Can be used as a penalty. Right? And as we talked about, the penalty only comes in to the real world if a certain condition happened. For example, the condition could be there is a breach of contract. If there's no breach of contract, no penalty is to be paid. So, comparing with deposit, since we're talking about the differences between deposit and penalty, deposit must be delivered upon the entering into a contract, which means that the day when the contract is entered into, the day where the offer and acceptance meets, deposit is delivered. And because it's delivered, it has to be a movable thing. Comparing with penalty. Penalty is paid upon a condition in the contract, not when the contract is entered into. No, it's paid upon the occurrence, the happening, right? The arising of a certain condition in the contract. For example, breach of contract give rise to a payment or penalty, right? And the penalty can be in the nature of any kind of thing, right? Tangible, intangible, it can be any property as well. The third difference is, of course, I think we already discussed this quite in depth when we talk about why do we need a deposit, why do we need a penalty, right? A deposit secure, acts as a security, pakan. Okay, pakan what? Secure what? Secure the performance ni, right? If the seller plays the deposit, the seller is pakan, is providing a security that the seller will sell, right? If the purchaser is the one who plays the security, the deposit is the purchaser giving the guarantee that the purchaser will buy, right? So it's securing the performance, right? Because if the party who placed the deposit did not perform, then the deposit will be seized, will be taken, right? So it acts as a security. Now, comparing with a penalty. Comparing with a penalty is not securing anything, right? As we talked about it in depth, the penalty is aimed to punish, to long toll the person who did not perform a condition. I repeat, the penalty is there to punish, to long toll the person who did not perform a certain condition, right? And breach the contract, for example. If you look at it from the opposite view, the flip side view, on the view of the person who has been affected, who has been damaged, right? The damaged party who has been damaged due to this non-performance of the condition, the penalty acts as a kind of a compensation, as a kind of a compensation for the damages that occur. All right. Now, this is a kind of damages that is agreed between the contractual party, as we discussed in the previous topic on when we talked about deposit and penalty. Okay, penalty is not any, unspecified amount. Penalty is a specified amount that is agreed between the contractual parties, that if this happen, right, this certain number of amount of baht will be paid as a penalty. For example, 1 million baht would have to be paid as a penalty. 1 million baht is a fixed amount. Alright, there's one more thing you should note, if I have not already talked about it before. The parties to the contract can agree, I better write it here in a different color. The parties to the contract can agree on any amount of the penalty. All right? Any amount. But take note that in Thailand, okay, there is this thing called the Unfair Contract Term Act. This law, not this thing, sorry. The Unfair Contract Term Act orข้อสัญญาพรบข้อสัญญาไม่เป็นธรรมพรบข้อสัญญาไม่เป็นธรรม This law gives the court the power to reduce the penalty amount. to bring down this penalty amount, if the court thinks that the penalty amount as agreed by the contractual parties is too high, alright, the court has the power given by this พรบข้อสัญญาไม่เป็นธรรม or Unfair Contract Term Act to reduce the penalty amount if the court thinks, only the court thinks, okay, not anybody else, only when the court thinks that the penalty amount is too excessively high. Alright, only the court can decide to bring this amount down. So if the case doesn't actually go to the court, then that whatever the penalty amount that is agreed between the contractual parties would have to be paid when the non-performance of a certain condition takes place. Okay, that's all for this part on the differences between the deposit and the penalty.